Okay, welcome back everybody to Windows Azure Websites Deep Dive Jumpstart. I'm James.
Tejasvi, and we are getting deeper and deeper as the session proceeds. We are going to get deeper and deeper.
Absolutely. So we've had an overview. We kind of understand what the Windows Azure Websites bits are all about.
We had the tour. We started with a tour.
Absolutely. So we know the portal a little bit better. We understand how it works a little bit better, some of the tools that we're going to be using. Now we want to talk about, well, after we've got some...
Now you can build the site. You know the tools to build your site, right? So now we'll look at how can you deploy it? How can you automate the deployment?
Right.
Right? So it's all going to be about productivity.
Exactly. So we're going to start now looking at a couple of common ways that you might approach deploying to Windows Azure Websites. And
what are the tools available? And what are the services available?
Exactly. Okay, so let's get started. Jump right into the slides because we do have a couple of demos here as well.
Cool.
Okay, so right off the hop, we kind of want to give a little bit of background. So for those of you who haven't worked in the continuous deployment world before, what does that look like?
What is continuous deployment? Let's start at
we'll start there and kind of break that down and figure it out. And then we'll talk about what happens when you do a deployment. Because there's something in the background that's going on that's taking care of making sure the right build gets to the right place. So who's in charge of that? And as a developer, I want to know. Like you said before, I don't trust it until I understand it, right? So
it's the developer's mindset, right? So I want it, and I want it now.
Exactly.
I want to know it.
Exactly. And even though we understand how things happen, very explicitly, like if you're doing a deployment to an IIS server that you're in control of, you know exactly what's going on as that happens. So when you're approaching continuous deployment, then you're going to want to make sure that you kind of know what's going on in the background there as well. That gives you options to troubleshoot, to customize. So let's really dive in and figure out how all of that's working. And then back to the slide deck there, really quickly, we're going to look at how it works inside of Visual Studio Online. I've got a project right now that off the hop is not working. I can't get my build to pass, so we're going to try and get the changes checked in there and see if we can't get a deployment to roll. So we are baiting Demo Demon here.
Are you rubbing it on him, by the way, by any chance?
What's that?
Are you rubbing it on the Demo Demon?
A little bit, yeah. We're trying to see if he's going to actually take a cue from us and pick up and cause some havoc. So I've got something that's broken right now intentionally, and we're going to try and fix it and get that moving. Thankfully, the fix should be pretty easy. So we'll see how it goes. And then we're going to look at Git integration. Then we're going to talk about a common continuous deployment approach, which is called Git flow. Now, we're not going to teach Git flow here, but if you're used to using Git flow, then this is an example of how you might be able to approach something. And we will walk through a little bit about how you might approach that process and employ Git flow as part of a deployment strategy. So let's get to this background stuff. Let's talk about what it is that's going on in the background when we're doing a continuous deployment. And sorry, not what's going on in the background. Let's get a little bit of background about continuous deployment. Yeah. So continuous deployment is something that can augment your testing process and your continuous integration process. Now, we got to understand the difference there too. Continuous integration, as you know, is about making sure that you're merging your changes in as often as possible, several times a day, to the main code branch, right? That your team is working off of. You want to make sure that you're not breaking the build, or if you are breaking the build, you want to know about it as early as possible.
And what is the value of integration if you cannot deploy it? If you cannot extend that agility all the way to your production environment or staging environment, right?
Exactly. So this is now, we've got this idea about how we're going to make our changes inside using source control. We're across our team. We're rebuilding often, making sure that all the time our code is integrated and working. The builds are passing in. Wonderful. What is the next step? How do I now automate this and push this out to the cloud? We're here talking about Windows Azure Websites. Yeah. So what happens?
Coming back to start simple, code smart, and go live.
Exactly.
So continuous deployment is more about go live and coding smart.
Right, absolutely.
And the starting simple is done. So it assumes that you have started, you have built your website, now you want to code smart, you have done some smart coding, now you want to go live as quickly as possible. So this is what continuous deployment is about.
So we're going to take those kind of marketing things then. And
pillars.
The pillars of marketing for Windows Azure Websites. We forgot spend time with family there again, but that's written. That's unwritten. It's just there, right? We know it.
It's implicit.
But now let's talk about, in the context of each of these pillars. What does it mean from a development perspective or from a developer's perspective? So we've got the ability to easily create our sites. We've seen already, as you showed us in the overview, it's very simple to spin up a new site using templates. Find the framework that we're familiar with. We don't need to worry about the scaling. You're going to show us some great examples of scale.
Absolutely.
I think that's the next module, actually.
Yep.
So we're going to be able to look at how we can be smart about those things and leverage them as, from a simple beginning, And then we're going to move into the next piece, which is coding smart. So we've got the simple start. Now we're going to be smart about it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so use the language of your
tools
choice.
help you code smart. So you don't have to be smart to code, but you can leverage the tools to do the smart thing for you. So if I can do it, anyone can do it because I leverage the tools.
Now, if you're a developer listening in on that, don't let that out of the box too much because this is job security for us. If everybody knows how, tools actually they make you more productive. Regardless of your level of experience, as long as you understand, you have a good beat about what's going on in the background. The tools are going to really augment it and make it smart, make you seem smarter and more productive. And then, of course, the other advantage that you've got is that as you're coding, that check-in process can start to drive things. We've got this constant CI thing that we're doing, this continuous integration. We want to now take that to the next step and make sure that we get ourselves into a test environment as quickly as possible, and we want to remove as much friction as possible there.
So what we want to do is basically add quality gates between your check-in and your deployment, right? So that's where those gates will check whether you're checking in the right code, whether you're passing all the tests, and then only we will deploy. It's not that you're checking in and every time there is a deployment triggered. So there needs to be a strategy from a team perspective on how the check-in works, how the quality gates are executed, and how the application and website is deployed into Windows Azure.
Right. Continuous deployment doesn't mean just every change you make, push it right to production. Continuous deployment means get the project built and into an environment where it can execute, and you can do any of those background automated tests that you've got, make those happen, and when all of those pass, then you're going to be able to deploy to production. But you want to make sure you've got a gate there that prevents entry into production just by any random commit.
It's checks and balances, right? So you want that gatekeeper to find out whether you are building the right code, whether you're coding smart, right? And whether you are able to go live or not, or you have built something that is capable of going live or not.
Right, so simple, smart, and then the next thing that we need to hit on as part of this whole bit is actually going live, right? Getting it up and running. And for us as developers, we can still take this hands-on approach. So if that gate needs to be, like if your environment requires that you have to push the button in order to make it go into production, that's okay. You don't have to go all the way with continuous deployment. You don't have to say, hey, as soon as the tests pass in our acceptance test environment, automatically publish it. Maybe you want to schedule it or whatever the case may be. So you can take a hands-on approach if you want to, or you can just back off entirely and let automated process take over for you.
Yeah, in today's world, in a lot of large-scale environments also, there are no testing teams anymore. So dev and test is embedded into one team, right? So this is the new DevOps model. So where the developer is responsible for his code, and he's also responsible for testing it and making sure that it's capable of going live. So as a developer, you're on the hook all the time, right? So you are the support person also, the third level support. It's not the tester anymore. So testers are developers and developers are testers now.
Right.
So both of them, now it's a DevOps team that builds the product.
Right, exactly. Okay, so we can keep moving there as well and have a look at the next point there. Actually, just back up for one quick second there. That idea of the management, the monitoring, reliability, scalability as part of the go live process. You alluded to the idea of DevOps. Well, the intelligence around the health of your application is critical. We want to make sure that when we go live, we've still got a simple approach to these things. We're smart about how we do it. And this is really, again, about one of those metrics that you can use to judge your cloud provider. Because if you don't have those capabilities to scale and to monitor and to look at the logging, then you're falling short of what you need for a production.
And looking from another angle, right? At the end of the day, it's all about providing business value in your product or application, right? So the whole team, needs to work towards providing that high quality application that doesn't fail, that provides the right availability to your customers so that you don't lose business. If you lose business, you lose your job. So that's what this whole infrastructure about DevOps is built around. And also time to market. It's quickly releasing new features in time. But the question here is, are they good quality? Right? So there is always a trade-off between quality and time to market.
Right.
But you need to make sure that you have the appropriate quality gates to apply those quality standards on top of your
we're
product.
assuming here then at least that everybody that's tuned in so far and will tune in, that they've at least bought into the belief that it's scalable enough and sturdy enough and worthwhile enough, it's adding enough value to their process that they want to dive in. So as far as deployments go, what does that mean? What are my options for deployment? Yeah. And really, we've known for, there's some that we've known for a long time. Web deploy became available, I think, with 2008, and it's gotten stronger and stronger and allowed you to really build out customizations around the deployment process. FTP has been kicking around forever. Now you've got options. Of course, if you're going to use FTP, you'd probably want to stick with SFTP, so your encrypted credentials and all those kinds of things.
And it's downstream enough, right? It's tested, packaged, and then FTP'd, not FTP'd from your desktop into production environment.
Right,
so,
but
because with FTP you cannot add quality gates as efficiently as you would add in Visual Studio Online or other Git related systems.
But for most folks, web deploy and FTP aren't going to be the more common options, just simply because those ones there's still a lot of manual rub to make those ones work properly. So instead, we've got options like Visual Studio Online. We can use Git or Dropbox. Mercurial is another option. So there's all kinds of ways that we can get at it, where we can actually wrap some kind of source control and then automate these deployment ideas, this concept of having multiple deployments that can be, you want to be able to roll back, right?
Yeah.
You did an oops and you need to push the unoops button. Well, how do you make that work, right? How do we actually roll back and make that work? So now, using source control based deployments, you do get that history. You do get that ability to roll back to anything that was successful in the past. And more immediately through the portal, without any crazy work at all, you can go back to any of your last 5 deployments very, very easily. But it does this through something called service hooks. And depending on the platform that you're using, the service hook operates a little bit differently, and the back-end deployment happens a little bit differently. But for the most part, you associate a connection with some kind of source control management back-end, for example, Codeplex, Bitbucket. Yeah. I'm adding extra L's in there, I guess. You've got, of course, GitHub and then Visual Studio Online. So, and again, we're referring to what we probably would have referred to before as the Team Foundations system hosted instances. Now it's called Visual Studio Online as part of the whole branding and strategy that's building out.
And you get deployment history in the portal as well as in the tools.
That's right.
So in the first session we saw when I deployed the Dropbox page, in the deployment section of the portal, you saw the number of deployments that were deployed. And it also has comments in it. So you can tie those comments. You can have intelligent comments and then automate that whole deployment process and log that information somehow.
Absolutely. Right? So if you wanted to go like all the way to the end, for example, with GitHub, you can actually close issues with a commit. So you could actually even automate it to the point where if all of the issues that you want are closed, then do a push to a different environment. So there's all kinds of automation capabilities that you can do and build out on your own as part of your infrastructure. But there's a starting point. There's a great starting point, and really what we're talking about there is some of what the out-of-box functionality.
Yep.
So moving into that, then I guess we kind of want to understand what's going on under the hood when a deployment starts to occur.
Wearing our developer hat again, right? So we need to know.
We need to know. Yeah. So there's this little utility.
It's a secret. Actually, it's the best kept secret.
It really is. It's an open source project, and it is a slice of Azure that is completely open source, and it's called Kudu. And Kudu is the internal deployment engine.
It's not employment. It's
not employment.
It's open source.
It's open source, yeah. Nobody has job security over this necessarily. But actually, there's some great, really smart folks that are working on it.
Yep.
And what it does is it just makes your deployment so simple, so streamlined. And what it's doing now, again, we talked about depending on the environment that you're in, the service hook is going to operate a little bit differently. But essentially, what it's doing is it's watching for check-ins. And when that check-in is completed, it initiates either locally or remotely an automated build, and it will collect the output of that build for you, stage it up, and then turn that on live as your live site for whatever you've got published for Windows Azure websites. So
So let's say if I want to build an environment using Kudu, can I do that myself?
To build an environment using Kudu
in my data center.
In your data center, well, as part of the local version of Azure, where you get the Azure Pack or whatever, that's included there as well. So you still get all of those features and whatnot there as well. But after all of that happens, Kudu Sync is really where the cool stuff starts to happen, and it makes sure that all the back-end swap happens for you, so your site stays live, flips over to that deployment, and keeps your site running for you. So.
Okay.
Now, as we mentioned, it's open source, so it's available on GitHub, and it's automatically installed in every instance of a website that you create. So it's one of those things when I was talking before about, well, how did you get that available for scaling? What did you have to do? Well, nothing. It's just hands off. It's available. It's free there.
I love nothing.
Yeah,
nothing is good a lot of the times, right? So because if you're a fan of Seinfeld, right? So nothing is a keyword. So nothing is important because basically a lot of the times you don't need the headache of doing these infrastructure tasks like installing Kudu for you, right? So there is one more added quality gate you need to add in your deployment process to check whether the deployment happens properly or not. In this case, Microsoft is taking care of deploying Kudu for you. You just worry about your application and data.
Right, and if Kudu isn't doing all of the things that you need it to do, the brilliant part about it is that from the command line tools, you're actually able to generate the same deployment script that Kudu would use on Azure, but you can generate that locally and push that up as part of your site, and then you can control how that deployment process works. Okay, so let's keep moving here, and we will have a look at an example of a project that is wired up with Visual Studio Online. And I've got a project here, and so I'm up in my bench here, my workbench here inside of Visual Studio Online, and you just get there by going to visualstudio.com. You log in with your credentials that are associated with your Azure account, and then you make up your from there. I mean, you don't have to use the same credentials, but you
can start for free.
Right, start for free.
Start is free.
Right, and up to 5 team members and all of those kinds of things, and all the projects that you want to get kickstarted can happen here. So this is just a shell. There's some things that are going on, but I want to just pop over to my dashboard in Azure, and when I look at my demo here under TFS, you can see that I've already done a number of deployments. I'll pop into my deployment dashboard here. And this is the one that should be broken for me. So after it loads here, it's just going to... So these deployments are actually stored on disk, and information about the deployment and all of the log output and everything is available as well. It's stored inside of my site, so I can actually browse to it and have a look at what's there. But I can also just view the logs directly on the site here. So I have a deployment failed here. I'm going to view the log. And we're going to start to get a little bit of a better picture of what's actually happening behind the scenes. So I've got a log, and now you'll notice this one actually has jumped me over to where the build happened, which is inside of TFS. And you can see that there is a continuous deployment build script that was created for me, and here's the output of the last log. So at the bottom we can see here.
And so one point here is, the Visual Studio Online service includes a build engine as a service, right? It's called Hosted Controller. It's a build controller, and when you check in, if you have automated deployment set up, the build service kicks in and starts the build.
Exactly, and in this particular case, we can see from the logs very easily that something went wrong with a test method that we've got. So it's important to note here as well that if you've got tests that you're running inside of your solution, you want to make sure that nothing goes live unless the tests pass. Then you have that as a quality gate as well. So that's kind of a cool feature that we've got there built in for us.
And the value of this is, let's say you're a team of developers. You have 20 people working on it. So the code might compile and run on your machine. So it works on my machine, right? So then, but there are other developers who add integration into that code and the build fails.
Right. Exactly.
So that is a common scenario.
Yeah,
so that's
absolutely.
a quality gate you need to check.
Now, I found my offending code. I'm inside of my unit test. A bit of a pop quiz for you here. Can we see what the problem is? I've got assert r equal true and false. Well, obviously that's gonna fail because true and false are not the same, thankfully. Otherwise, a lot of what we know about computer science breaks down really quickly. So I'm gonna do true and true, and then now because I've already integrated with Team Foundation, or sorry, I'm integrating. I've got Team Explorer here, which is connected to Visual Studio Online. And again, if you want to connect your project to source control, then you just simply need to, I'm going to get this Zoom guy out of the way here. Sorry, folks. We're going to just go in and we can actually add our, again, I have source control all set up here already, but all you really need to do is say,
add solution to your source control.
Exactly.
You get that option.
Right.
Instead of check in and check out, you will get the option add solution to source control.
That's right. And then once you've got that configured, then you're tied to that server and you can check out your code and away you go. So in this particular case, I can go into Team Explorer and look at the pending changes. And you can see that I've got one change here in my unit test. So I'm just going to do fixing test. This is a great comment. Everybody's going to know exactly what I did, just fixing test, right? So we'll put a smiley face in there as well. And I'm going to check that guy in. Now, there's a couple of things that are going to happen here. So there's this push-pull thing that's going on behind the scenes. So it's important to note that this isn't going to happen automatically. I'm going to just sync up these changes here, refresh these. Got it checked in, so I should see appearing here very shortly that...
So when you check in, the code is basically checked into Visual Studio Online.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So, and then it triggers a build. Right?
It does, and so the trigger has fired the action resulting to that trigger, and this is important that we're thinking about these triggers and actions. I have done something, therefore there will be something that happens on the other side of it. And in this particular case, I've done my check-in, and now this is queued to build up for me.
Yeah, the key is understanding the workflow, right? So queued, completed, deployed. Right?
That's
you
right.
see those three headings on the top.
Exactly. So I'm going to just have a look here again, and we're still just waiting for this to process. So we can wait here, but essentially what's going to happen is at some point that guy's going to show up right here again as soon as that build service is done. Now I won't try and fast track it here. I'm just going to kind of let it flow through. But now that the test is passing, the deployment will complete and it'll push the completed deployment right through. So I've got ID 34 here. I just want to see where I'm at. I think I don't have any more tests or anything pending here. We can go check our build status again. See how it's doing. It's probably in process so far. So it was queued 2 minutes ago. So we kind of need to wait to get that one going.
So if you go back to the Visual Studio Online homepage.
Yes.
Right? So one thing that you need to understand here is Visual Studio is addressing the entire life cycle of your deployment, right? If you see here. So there is work items, there is code, there is build, there is test, and then there is deploy.
Right.
So it's the entire application lifecycle management embedded in here.
Exactly. And if you and your team agree to a set of work and you want to call that a sprint, then you can track that in here as well. Yeah. You can choose your lifecycle management process that you want to follow. In this particular one, it's an agile one that we've picked. And so we've got the idea of sprints and work items and backlog and those kinds of things.
I love the backlogs. If you go to backlog, you can just create a list of items, just random list. It can be a checklist. Maybe we can... Or maybe shopping list for your technology items.
Exactly, exactly. I'm just gonna check in on my build again, and we can see under completed. I still don't have it there, so it's still just waiting. But I mean, we'll just use the trust us mantra here. This will eventually, usually within 5 minutes, this is up and
Did you call the demo demon during the break?
Maybe I did. Maybe he has joined us.
Or you forgot to call him. Yeah, we'll come back. So there you go. It's deploying.
It's now the build's completed and it's picked up. And that by the way,
take the name of the devil and the devil is here.
I will not be doing that. I'm going to stick with my deployment number 35 here, and this will just take a couple of minutes to spin it up, and then that change will be live. And then again, I'll be able to browse the last or the last check-in that I've done, and after that build's completed. So.
And the point here is, if you see how simple it was to automate a particular deployment, right? So you're building an application, a code. You don't care about the source control service or anything. You just check in your code as a developer. There are quality gates that are already put in place, right? And there is a build that is automatically triggered in Visual Studio Online. And then there is a deployment that happens. And as a developer, your job is done long time back.
Right. And I haven't done anything really other than in my solution, I added a unit test project, and just by default, the solution in its entirety will be built for you inside of Visual Studio Online. And because of that, you get to take advantage of the whole idea of if the unit test fails, then then it doesn't pass through that quality gate. I don't have to do any configuration inside of Visual Studio Online to make that happen. That just happens for free.
And then you can have further layer of tests also. You can have unit test, you can have integration test, you can have automated test, right?
Right, exactly. So, and then again, because we can do any customizations to that build script that we want to, it's just part of it lives on Visual Studio Online. Then here we go. We've got welcome to fun deployments, and I didn't have to push any buttons to actually make a deployment happen. All I did was check my code in. So
absolutely.
Okay, excellent. So we've got another example that we want to have a look at here, and that's how do we tie Git together, and what does that whole Git process look like? So I'm going to switch gears a little bit here and pop into the website that we were playing with before. Actually, let me look at Node ABCs. I think I've got Git deployment set up for that. And I have this Git URL. So for those of you familiar with Git, you're going to know what this is, but basically it's the home of the repository. And so when you go to add a remote where you're going to push your code to, this is the URL that you need. So I can, just from the portal, I can copy that to my clipboard, and then I'm going to pop over into WebMatrix where I'm going to open a website from source control. And then it gives me the option, well, do you want to do it from TFS server, which is actually...
that's the underdog, by the way. WebMatrix is the underdog.
Right, we're inside of the underdog, and we're doing like next gen continuous deployment kind of stuff. So
live,
yeah. So I'm going to open site from Git, and then I'm going to paste that in, and it actually picks up the name of the site for me just off of the name of the repository. So that's kind of nice as well. And then I can say OK. It's going to go and ask me for my credentials again to make sure that it is actually me. That's the reason why I'm not worried about anybody else seeing this, because if you don't have your username and password that you need, you're not going to be able to get into this endpoint. So it's going to actually pull down an entire copy of the repository. It's going to pull all the tools in that I need, appropriately arrange itself so that I'm going to have, here we've got Node.js Detective, and it says, hey, now we want to install some dependencies as well. Yeah. This is that great stuff you were talking about before with your experience with Node.js. Yeah. So I'm going to install these, and then, we've got some EULA stuff. Of course, I read this. Okay, we're going to let it...
It never changes.
No, it doesn't ever.
Yeah, you just read it once.
Actually, if you read it in Windows 95 when you installed it, you're pretty much good to go. So, yeah. Okay, so it does the configuration, and then now I can dive in and start editing. And if I want to, basically any of the changes that I want to make, I can do so here. I'll go into one of my views, and in my layout, I'm going to change name, for example. Now, it seems you have no task. There's a good example. Oh, actually, we have a lot of tasks already in here. So we've got add a task. I'm going to say add a new task. So minor change, but as we all know, source control or source code is just text anyways. So any change, the fact that this just happens to be inside of an H3 as a heading, no big deal here, right? Like it's just a piece of code as far as anything else is concerned. Now, there's a couple of things I need to do. I need to commit, and then I need to push the changes out. Yeah. So those are available right through the source control tab here. So I can commit my changes. It's going to give me a prompt. I'm going to say, I did some stuff.
And that tab was automatically created when you attach the WebMatrix environment to GitHub.
Right, because I opened it from source control, the source control tab is available for me right off the hop. And I'm going to hit OK, and it's going to go away and do some stuff. And down here it's telling me that it added a web config file. I'm not going to push that up to cloud. I don't want to mess with it or whatever. But I've got settings in here for my repository. I can add additional remotes. So if you are working with different environments, for example, the staging environment and the production environment, you've got the ability to set up different remotes as well. I've done my push, but I can also open up a shell. So if I run into any conflicts or whatever the case may be, then this is Posh Shell, so I can pop in there if I need to. And now I've done my push, so if I pop back over to the portal.
So one thing to understand here is, so commits it to the local Git repository, right?
That's
and
right.
then when you push it, it actually pushes to, let's say it's a GitHub, it pushes to the remote GitHub repository.
Exactly. So I'm pushing to origin. The push happens, and then as soon as this is complete, we're going to be able to pop over to, well, there it is, right away. It's already synced up its changes, and it's updating its branch. It knows that it has to get these files in. Now it's running the deployment command, so it's actually giving you some pretty good feedback here as to what it's doing. And of course, when it's all done, we're going to be able to have a look at the end result of that.
So behind the scenes, the Git hooks were fired.
Right.
Right. And so because there is Kudu running on the virtual machine, it understands the Git language.
That's right.
Git hooks language. And there was an event fired. And then it automatically pulled the source code from GitHub or the Git repository.
Right, in this particular case, the local one. Or whatever,
local one, yeah. And then it is now deploying. Oh, it's active. So it's now deployed. It deployed that website into the web environment. Now, if you relate this to our architecture, right, the first architecture in our first module, so we covered all this where behind the scenes, the site went to the cold mode. Now, when you're running it, it's now deploying that website and
so
turning it into a hot mode.
Right, thinking back to that whole procedure as to what's happening, it has to go through those processes again and get the worker role updated and all of those things. And when that's ready, it does that hot swap for you. And now with that deployment out, it's ready to go. Now I've got here on here, add a new task rather than just add a task. So that was the change that I made. Now I've realized that my manager came back and I didn't get an assigned change request. I'm not allowed to say new on this page, so they just want it to be add a task. I need to roll back that change. So you showed us before, it keeps track of the history.
Yep.
So now I want to go back and change that. So it's fairly easy to do inside of the portal. I can just click on this guy right here and say, I want to switch back to this branch. I can look at what I did, any of the commit notes that are on here, and I just go down to the bottom of the command bar. Again, it's always updated with the context of where you are in the dashboard.
So always keep a watch on that command bar, right? You might miss some of the cool features that are available in that context.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. So now I'm going to pop back to this old deployment that I've got, and that new word, which is a swear word in my company for some reason, that's now gone. That's now gone. And when I go back to the site, I can go back in and browse again. And we're back to that same process. We've got the cold thing going on, and we need to warm it up. And away we go, right? So there we go.
So you released 1.1 on top of 1.0.
Right.
But 1.1 is no good.
Right. There's something.
There is a problem in there.
There
is a bug in there.
So production identified.
Yeah. In this case, it was just a text. For marketing sites, it can be a big deal.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But it can be another e-commerce production site.
So right, and you know what's interesting too is depending on the environment and the framework and the tool set that you're using, you may have things like database migrations installed. And a common strategy with Entity Framework, for example, would be to use a migration strategy that allows you to move up and down in the database and to move data and to add tables, to make changes to columns and whatnot, and to do that in reverse as well. So you get I want to migrate forward or backwards.
Yeah, what I love here is you were able to go back to 1.0.
Right.
Without any effort, with the click of a button. So
exactly.
That is huge in today's world if you want to do it, right? In your own environment. You have to invest a lot in the infrastructure that does that, unless you are running Azure Pack, of course. But in most, if you go 5-10 years back, this kind of flexibility and agility didn't exist. Right? Unless you invested in those tools. Now, this kind of flexibility is available to normal developers, single developers, right? You can just go in, create code, create app, and submit it into Visual Studio Online or Git and deploy it.
Right, and even that process of setting up, like Web Deploy is a great tool, and I highly recommend installing it through the Web Platform Installer for any time you do have your own infrastructure that you have to manage. And when you set up Web Deploy, it makes it very easy. You can generate the published profile right out of IIS, and you can import that into your project. Well, it's still, you still have to go through all that legwork of getting it up and running. And if you have to go and set up a VM and get all that stuff, you don't have to worry about that right here. So
I don't like VMs.
You don't like VMs? Well, they do serve a purpose.
So I like cloud. I like platform as a service. I kind of stay away from infrastructure as a service.
So we're here inside.
It's just my choice.
Yeah. So we're here inside of this platform as a service, and we've got our deployment set up, and we had to bail on it. And had I migration set up, then what would have happened was, if I had the proper trigger and I had written my application accordingly, it would have also rolled back any changes to the database. So I don't need to worry about any of that stuff happening as well. It will just happen for me automatically. In this particular case, I didn't change the database, but here we go. I can just add a new. I finished my prep for MVA, so I just update that task. That goes away, and then I'm going to say show continuous deployment category. Training, and I'll spell it right even too. We'll add that item. So that's now inside of the, the database is working and everything's good. So we're good to go. So that is the basic Git integration. We kind of want to take that to the next step, and we want to say, okay, that's fine. But all we did is we took a production site, and rather than making changes directly against it, we were making the changes in a source control repository, and then we were publishing directly back to prod.
Yep.
So we probably don't want to go quite there. We probably want to have something else.
To apply some breaks there.
Right.
So make sure the quality is up to the mark. Right?
I want to test it in the cloud and make sure that in the cloud it works, but I don't want to necessarily go to this to production right away. So we get the breaks in there. We set up some gates to make sure that it doesn't go all the way, and then we introduce something that is you can have all kinds of patterns for continuous deployment strategies. The one we're going to talk about next is really under Git flow. So Git flow basically says you've got a branch called master. Master's always ready to go to production. You've got a branch called develop or dev, and that's the one where you're going to be doing all of your work off of. Now, you don't actually do work on the development branch. You would create yet a third branch, like another branch off of that, and you do all of your work there. You get ahead of that development branch, and when you're done, you check your changes and you merge them into dev. Okay, now that's important because I've done a merge and that branch has been updated. So when I update that branch, what can we do? We can trigger another deployment.
Yep, or test it, right? Apply quality gates.
Exactly.
If the merging fails, let's say I forgot to consider someone else's code, what he is working on, right?
Right.
And that conflicts with my component, right? So the merging fails.
And if that, whatever happens there, however we have to go about resolving that merge, because we've got that gate in there and we've said, one thing to point out is that when you associate with Git, and I'll pop back into the portal there, I've got this deployment history, and from my dashboard, actually from the configure tab here under Node, under this website, I am looking at my branch to deploy right here. This guy right here shows me that I'm working off of master. So with Git flow, we've introduced this other branch, and we've said, actually, I'm going to do all of my development on the dev branch. I create my features in these feature branches. I can create feature gates if I want to, whatever the case may be, whatever your strategy is, that's fine. But because I'm checking my stuff in, or I'm merging into that dev branch, this isn't going to trigger a build and deployment for my production site. So now we've got this other kind of gateway where we can do something else. I've merged into dev. Well, let's use that as the hop off for our continuous deployment strategy and say, I'm going to run my acceptance tests or notify the acceptance test team that they can start on the pre-production build that we're getting ready to push out. And they can test off of that branch that's been deployed using this development branch.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll pop back out here. We're going to look at another sample that we've got set up. You're going to add something? Or no? Okay, good. So this is a simple app that is deployed to two environments. There's an acceptance test environment and there's a cloud environment. So I will show you we got too many copies of IE running here. We'll have to clean those up here before we start the next session. We're going to get lost. So we've got the MVA survey QA. I've got it in QA, but I mean AT, whatever you want to call it. And we've got the MVA survey one. So the MVA survey is live. That is a live site, and people can go to it and check that out and start logging. We're going to go to browse this guy actually right here, and I'll show you what it does. Right now, it just basically lets you pick a survey, and then there's some administration stuff that you can do. This is the endpoint for the survey, and if somebody clicks on it, they can now choose, how do you bring the awesome? Well, you can pick whatever. You can say all of them if you want to, or none of them, and then your level of awesomeness, because everybody's got a level of awesomeness. Yeah. How much are you going to add to this whole thing, right? And then from my administrative dashboard, I've got this kind of summary or whatever. So we're going to have a look at this in a little more detail later on. But basically, there's no results here yet, but as people start to answer the survey, I'd actually be able to see the results fly in. So that is the live version of the site, and I've got the unsaved changes will be lost. That's fine. I'm going to just pop over here to QA, and then inside of QA, you'll notice the biggest difference here is that the branch to deploy is the dev branch. There's really nothing more going on that we didn't already do, other than I've set up this secondary site, and I've said the branch to deploy is now dev. That gives us some really cool features, because I can go in here now and add some app settings that are just particular to the QA environment or the dev environment or the AT environment or whatever the case may be. I can add connection strings that are relevant only to the test environment or the development environment. So
you can separate out dev, test, and QA environments and production, and not have dev access production sites at all.
Exactly.
Right? So devs have to work on devs branch only. Right. Whereas the release people can work on the release and production branch only.
Exactly. And as a developer, if I want to create my own branch and then do a deployment out to Azure websites, I can, right from within Visual Studio, I can do all of that, or from within WebMatrix, I can do all of that on the fly, and I don't need to pop back and forth to the portal. So lots of flexibility here. There's a lot of ways that you can go. So again, we're not teaching you the Git flow process today. We're not teaching you how to use Git, but for those of you familiar with it, this is a really easy way that you can apply it in your as part of your CD strategy, your continuous integration, continuous deployment strategy, and make this tick inside of here. Lots of great resources for it. So check out, just do a Bing search for Git flow, and you will find the top result is going to be a diagram that walks you through how all of that works if you're interested in it. But we've got a couple of other things to cover as far as deployment goes. So let's keep moving. We'll actually pop back to the slide deck here. This is a little bit of sugar that was just recently added, or
it's
at least
holiday season, so sugar is
sure.
not bad.
Yeah, sugar is great. Make cookies with your family, because you can walk away from your website.
Yeah.
Service hooks, as you're familiar with them from a Git perspective, Mercurial, whatever the case may be, Visual Studio Online, when the service hook says, okay, well, the user's taken this action, now I need to do a trigger. So the only action that's available right now, the only service hook that you've got is the one that says your deployment is complete. It doesn't say your deployment is it's not saying on a successful deployment or on a failed deployment, just the deployment is complete. And at that point, you can choose what to do, if anything, with with that service hook call. So the idea of the trigger action thing is important. We talked about that a little bit before. This is the service hook itself can be found inside of the portal. So I'm going to pop into my portal again here, log into the site. Actually, right, we've got an example of it up on the slide deck. For this particular one, there's a deployment trigger URL, and that's just a long string. It's just an HTTP request that gets made, and setting up that association allows you to tie in other services to this deployment hook.
This gets automatically created for you.
Absolutely. This is another one of those things that are just free when you create the site, right?
Yeah.
So with that, you take that, you copy it to your clipboard, you move over to a different service. One of the other services that's available is something called Zapier, and this is I went here because the Azure team has already set up what they call a zap. A zap is simply an action that happens as a result of a trigger. So in this case, the trigger is our deployment. The action is whatever we want it to be. I can start a new card in Trello. I can make a phone call to a particular number. In this case, all I've done is said, hey, use Windows, when Windows Azure Websites is completed a deployment, then send a text message using Twilio.
It's an if statement.
On the action side. On the action side. But regardless of whether or not it's a successful deployment or a failed deployment, we're going to know about it, and we can then create filters, et cetera, and respond to the actions however you want to. So we don't have a live demo of that running. We just wanted to show you that there's all kinds of things you can do with that and to kind of build that out. Okay, so kind of covering off, recapping here on this module. We talked about the differences between continuous deployment and continuous integration, how both are important, they complement each other, they augment that whole testing and deployment procedure, and how these things can come to play. Now, because it's all done through the management API, all of the bits of deployment are available through the management API. You get great opportunity to use some of those PowerShell scripts or to use service hooks on the other end and integrate them with SEM or such as Git or Mercurial, Dropbox, any of those other things to stage your deployments and to bring those live, or to trigger external services like trigger action scenario that you've got hosted on Zapier or any one of other services external. Write your own.
Yeah, and apply quality gates. Right. You can even create your own build engine and hook it into Visual Studio Online if you want. Right?
Absolutely.
So Visual Studio Online has a hosted controller which triggers a build for you when you check in. But you can have a large-scale build cluster as virtual machines that executes a build for you and automates the deployment. So the build is kind of a parallel process, but Visual Studio Online triggers that build. But where that build engine is, you can configure that.
Right, exactly. So that's kind of our what we wanted to share with you about continuous deployment, and we'll close at this module. We're actually going to, this is going to be our meal break for these sessions, so we're going to come back after we're done taking a quick break here. We're going to be about an hour, and we'll be back online, and
we'll cover scaling and configuration.
Yeah, and this is the next, now you've deployed, well, now what? Now how do you make it...
Yeah, now your blog has become popular.
Right, so where do you go with it from there? Yeah, okay, excellent. We will see you after the meal break in about an hour. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you.